video will be a brief discussion of the source list. Now, the source list is going to be required for the Essay 3 outline, the final draft of Essay 3, the research paper rough draft, and the research paper final draft. The source list is just a list of all the source material that appears in each of these assignments. And I'll do a more detailed run through of what that requires here in just a moment. So, starting on the Essay 3 outline, you were supposed to have submitted a source list with along with the Essay 3 outline. So you submitted the outline, and then along with it, you were required to submit the source list. And the source list, you had a template here that you were supposed to download and fill out. And the blank one looks like this. Okay, you had some instructions up at the top, and then if you scroll down, you had the blank sections for 1, 2, and 3 below. And the reason that I had 3 there is that on the Essay 3 outline, you were supposed to have at least 3 pieces of source material. And that's also the requirement for the Essay 3 final draft. But of course, you will add as many sections as you need to if you have more than 3 pieces of source material. Now, I do want to point out that at least 2 pieces of source material must be paraphrases on Essay 3. Okay? It's a different requirement once you get to the research paper, but for Essay 3, you must have at least 2 paraphrases, and the other one can be either a direct quote or a paraphrase. So there must be a total of 3, with at least 2 being paraphrases. So let's get into some more specifics here. So what I did is I pulled up the example outline that I gave you, and then I've also pulled up an example source list here. And so I'll kind of jump back and forth a little bit between these two. So let's say that this is your example outline, and the example that I created is about homeschooling. So here's my thesis. More regulation of homeschooling is needed to make sure children are safe and receiving a good education. So you would follow that thesis with a topic sentence, and then you would add a quote or a paraphrase that would help support that topic sentence. So you would fill in your reason, and then you would find your piece of source material that helped you support that idea. So here's the quote that I have. Okay. Unregulated homeschooling allows abusive parents to escape detection. That's a full sentence lead-in, so you have to have a colon here, right? If you put a comma, you'll create a comma splice. And then I have the exact quote in quotation marks, and then I have the author's last names in the citation at the end, and a period afterwards, okay? And so what I did is I just copied that quote, highlighted it, copy, and then I went over to the source list and I pasted it exactly as it appeared in my outline. And you'll do the same thing for the final draft of Essay 3. Now, since this is a direct quote, I wouldn't need to fill in this second section that talks about if it's a paraphrase. So you would ignore that part. But then you do need to include the URL address. Okay, so I've pulled up that article here. Right, so that's Coleman and Brightbill. Go up here, copy the address, go back to the source list, and I paste it there. And I usually just add a space so that the link becomes live, and that's all you have to do for that. Okay? All right, so the other two involve a little bit more work. These are your paraphrases. Okay? So let's pull up the outline here. In this case, did the same thing. I copied the paraphrase, went to the source list, and then I've already pasted it over here. Now, you'll notice that this one's a little different because you don't see an author name here. Now, the reason you don't see an author name is because this source is an editorial from a newspaper. If you have an author, then you must list the author's name, either in the lead-in or the citation. And that's what we did up here on number 1. Our authors were Coleman and Brightbill. But on number 2, this is an editorial and it doesn't have an official author because an editorial is the official stance of the newspaper. Okay, so in that case, what you need is the article title. All right, so I'm going to just pull that up over here. All right, so you'll see this is Homeschooling Safe. You don't see an author listed. So we know that that's the editorial. Okay, so you'll see, here's my paraphrase. A 2018 editorial from the Los Angeles Times suggests that school districts could conduct yearly inspections of homeschooling households to evaluate students' progress and to conduct private interviews to screen for possible abuse. And then I have my citation in parentheses, is homeschooling safe, right? So in this case, since this is a paraphrase, you need to include the original quote from the source. And the reason that you need to do that is so that I can check your paraphrase for accuracy and to make sure that it's not too close to a direct quote. Because remember that a paraphrase is putting the article's information in your own words. Okay, so it is not the same as a direct quotation, but it does require a citation. So paraphrases must be in your own words and they must include a citation. So let's look at the original quote. Here is the quote. I picked it from kind of the end of this editorial. So I'm going to copy it over. I'm going to put some quotation marks here. And I'm going to paste it. All right, and put quotation marks at the end. So here's the original quote from the editorial. What might a reasonable, non-bureaucratic set of rules look like? Here's one possibility. Annual inspections by school districts to ensure that students are learning in a decent environment. The inspectors would interview students privately so that they could feel safe talking about any abuse and would review the educational plan and a portfolio of the students' work to see whether the parents are actually teaching. So you'll see, right, I don't use any of the main words or phrases from the editorial. I've just put that information in my own words. And I've also given some context, right, that this is a 2018 editorial and that the source is the Los Angeles Times. And it's often helpful for you to include some context like that, especially if you're referring to research or statistics. It's really helpful if you tell like who is speaking or what the context of the research is. So make sure that it's someone who's coming at this quote or paraphrase from the outside wouldn't suddenly be confused by what you're writing. Okay, and we also need the URL address here. All right, so same thing, copy, and just paste that URL. Hit the space bar and make it turn live. Okay, and one more. Okay, here's a slightly different one. Here's another paraphrase, and I found this from Research Starters. So I'm going to go back to how it looks in the database so you can see this. In this case, there is a PDF available. Now, a PDF is a scan of the original text, and that means that original page numbers are available. So if you have that available, use the PDF. So I'm going to pull it up, and you can see the paraphrase was on page 4. Okay, so here's the paraphrase. One 2017 review of studies on homeschooled students found that homeschooled students who went on to college earned higher grade point averages than students with a traditional education. And that's from page 4. So let's scroll down. All right, and here is that section. Okay. This reference is to a study by author whose last name is Ray. Okay, so let's copy that on over. Quotation marks. Paste it. In quotation marks. Okay, Ray, right? And that paper was in APA style, so they give the dates internally. Ray examined 16 studies of college students who had been homeschooled and found no statistical differences in terms of retention rates and on-time completion rates between them and conventionally educated students. Homeschooled students who attended college tended to have higher grade point averages than those with conventional educations. So I've given some context, right? This was a 2017 review of studies on homeschool students. And what that found was that the homeschool students who did go on to college earned higher grade point averages than students who had regular traditional education. Okay, and I found that information on page 4 of the Scopus article. Now the URL address is a little bit different on this one. And I wanted to point this out because what's really common is that people pull up an article in EBSCO and they have this PDF and they automatically go up here. And what happens is if you have the PDF pulled up and you try and copy the URL, if it has something like PDF viewer in the address, the URL is always going to be broken. And so what you have to do is go back to this main section where you first pull up the article, look on the right-hand side and click Permalink. And what happens is this little skinny rectangle appears above the article title, and you'll see Permalink beside it. Highlight it, copy it, and that's what you use for your URL address. Okay, that link will always be good. Okay, so I think that's a pretty clear overview. Just remember, you copy over every piece of source material. If it's a paraphrase, you give the original quotation. Make sure it's not too close to a direct quote. Make sure that your paraphrase is accurate, but it doesn't use too many of the same words or phrases. It must be in your own words. It must have a citation. And that you add the URL address. And of course, if you're in EBSCO, that you use the permalink instead of just the regular URL in the address bar up at the top. So if you have any questions about this, please let me know, and I hope this has been helpful.